Hello and welcome to this week's Facebook Live with me, Louisa Whitney from LKW Family Mediation. As you know, there was no Facebook Live last week because I was away at Resolution's Dispute Resolution Conference, and wow, that was a great conference. It was great to catch up with colleagues and friends and find out what people are up to and hear more about their practices and things that have happened to them. It's always really interesting and empowering and thought-provoking to hear tales that other practitioners tell about things that have happened to them in their professional lives working with couples who separate. And I really enjoyed that. There was also a couple of really interesting workshops that I went to, which I'm not going to talk about today, but which I'm certainly going to be incorporating into things I'm doing going forwards at different points. And the one thing that I would mention is that one of the speakers that addressed the whole conference was Joe Berry and Patrick McGee. Now, Patrick McGee was the member of the IRA that planted the Brighton bomb that went off at the Conservative Party conference at the Grand Hotel in 1984. And Joe Berry's father was a Conservative MP who was killed in that attack. And they shared a stage together, which I'm sure you can appreciate is a huge thing in itself. Hearing the backstory to how that came about was really moving. You know, I don't want to include kind of, trite adjectives, but it really was moving. I know that I wasn't the only one with tears in my eyes when they were talking, and the fact that there was a standing ovation afterwards speaks volumes. And they talked about the fact that after Patrick was released under the Good Friday Agreement early release for prisoners programme, Joe arranged to meet up with him through mutual friends to talk about what had happened and to try to understand what it was like to have walked in his shoes and what had led him to do what he did. And Patrick responded to her by hearing what she had to say and hearing about her dad. And a number of times during his speech, he talked about, "I killed her father," which was him acknowledging what he had done, but also very powerful for all of us in the room to hear him acknowledge that. So it was a really quite incredible talk. Joe has founded a charity called Building Bridges for Peace, and her and Patrick have been out to places where there is conflict, places like Tel Aviv, like Rwanda, and they tell their stories. They were very keen to stress they don't go there telling people that they have all the answers. They just tell their story about how they have moved on and dealt with that conflict so far, because I'm not sure it's something that you ever stop dealing with. So that was really, really powerful. And particularly for me as a mediator, hearing people that were on opposing sides of a very dreadful event that happened, be able to hear each other's story and each other's point of view was so powerful. I talk a lot in mediation to couples who are separating about the importance of hearing and trying to understand each other's point of view, even if you don't agree with it. And it's a very hard ask of people, but there is an example of two people who have really, really taken empathy to a compelling place. I'm going to, in the comments on this live, share the link to the charity work they're doing, because if, like me, you're really moved, you may want to consider donating or finding out more about their work. But on to this week's live, which is about the blog that we published, or that I put up on Monday, about reviewing arrangements for children. And if you've been following these, you will remember that a few weeks ago, I released a blog on the top 5 tips to help separating parents to minimise the effects of their separation on children. And this is the 5th tip, to review arrangements. And I would say that there are 2 different catalysts for a review. One, I would say, is a regular review and checking in with each other, in whatever time frame feels right to you, whether that's 6 weeks or 6 months, to see if those arrangements are working for you and for your children. And excuse me, also a review that happens after a particular change in circumstances. So that could be that one of you has changed working patterns and arrangements that you'd made before are now no longer going to be workable. Or it could be that one of your children has taken up a new hobby and you have to kind of look at whether the arrangements you've made will work, given that they're going to have to be taken to this new place. Or it could be something's happened. You've realised that your child is really struggling to come to terms with the separation and is not coping well with the situation, and you may want to change the arrangements to try and help them to address that. Doesn't mean you always would, but something significant like that may be a trigger for you sitting down to say, are these arrangements working? Are they not? And so reviewing it that way. And one of the things I talked about in the blog was, excuse me, very croaky throat this morning. One of the things I talked about in the blog was trying to sit down together in a calm space. So, not when you've just had the most stressful day at work imaginable, and in a neutral place. Often it's easier to talk about things when you're not surrounded by the baggage that, the home that you used to share brings, or the home you're sharing with a new partner, that kind of thing. Create the right space where you can try to be calm in your discussions. The other thing is that depending on the ages of your children, and this may not apply for very, very young children, but talk to your children about the arrangements. And this doesn't mean anything that sounds like asking children to choose what the arrangements are. It's about your child having a voice in things that happen to them. And this is very timely for me because I did the Child Inclusive Mediation Awareness course on Wednesday, and I'm going to do a specific blog on that, so look out for that in the coming weeks. But it's very much about ensuring that your child has a voice in what is happening to them. And most of the studies that have been, in fact, all of the studies that have been done on separated parents and children and the effects over the last 30 years, one of the biggest things to come out of them was that children want to feel that they are being listened to and that they have a voice in arrangements that are being made that concern them. And you may be aware that there was a big report 4 years ago that highlighted the importance of the voice of the child and the children having a voice in their parents' separation about what happens to them and what's important to them. We all know that there is nothing worse than not feeling listened to, not feeling heard when something's important to you and you're not being heard. And I have to say, this is quite poignant to me this week, partly because of having done the Child Inclusive Mediation this week, but partly because my own son actually turned around to me this week and said, "You're not listening to me." And he was entirely right. I've had a stressful week with some things going on, quite a lot of work and a course, and my head was in 5 different places trying to think about, got to do that, must do that. And he was trying to tell me something that was important to him, and I wasn't listening. I was paying lip service in that kind of like, oh yeah, okay, oh that sounds fun, that kind of way, but I wasn't properly present with what he was saying, and he picked up on that. And that was quite humbling, but it also shows that even people like me who work with people in difficult circumstances and who understand the importance of listening really get it wrong sometimes. So hearing your children's voice in that, checking in with them and saying, we've put these arrangements in place ever since we separated. Are they working? What do you like about this? Is there anything that worries you? Is there anything that you think could work better? and having that conversation in an age appropriate way. One of the things that I also wanted to talk about in this live is that the idea of regularly reviewing arrangements can be something that causes people quite a lot of anxiety. I know that sometimes separating couples feel that they have, turned themselves inside out in order to try to make the arrangements in the first place. And the thought of having to regularly go through that process is, something that fills them with horror. They feel that it was quite hard to get through it in the first place, and they now want arrangements to stay as they are until the children leave home, because they just cannot face the thought of trying to talk to each other again or go through the same process again. And I think that also manifests itself in couples wanting to talk about arrangements for their children and to create something that is absolutely set in stone and that nobody can ever change. But anything concerning children will change naturally at different points. You may say that you will not allow your child to have a mobile phone, and that's something that you say when they're 3 or 4, but you may revisit it when they're older, or when they start secondary school, for example, or when they're later on, when they're a teenager. It's harder to have a cast iron rule of something that applies all the way through childhood. So there's always going to be things that you revisit. There may be that your child wants to take up a particular hobby, but they're not old enough, and then they do that when they reach the age where they are able to do that. So there is often going to be circumstances in which arrangements for children change, even where a couple are still married. Things that they do for their children or that they put in place for their children change over time. So it is very difficult to say that you make arrangements for your children and they will apply from the point that you separated when they are 3 until they are 18. I think where this stems from is when it's really hard to talk to your child's other parent and to make arrangements. You just don't want to put yourself through that horror anymore. And that's entirely understandable. When you have turned yourself inside out emotionally, had really difficult conversations, had arguments, it's a basic survival instinct that you don't want to put yourself through something that distresses you again. So I completely understand where people are coming from on that. But often what happens is that when people first have to resolve things when they've just separated, there are huge amounts of issues about children, about money, about houses, about the separation itself, about what's happened, often about the marriage and things that have happened in the marriage, and those are all tied up together. As you move forward and you go forth, some issues naturally close off. Once you've resolved the issues about money and you're each living you're both separate financial entities, it makes it a little easier to not have to deal with all of the same issues all over again. And other issues can also find that they get closure. You may have been deeply affected by the end of your marriage, but as time goes on, and particularly if you've had some kind of help like counselling or CBT or any of those things, you can find that you've put those issues to bed. So when you come back to talk about the issues concerning the arrangements for your children, then you can find that it's not the hideous process that it was before, because of the fact that there is now only talking about, do we think the arrangements we've still made for Molly and Luke still work, or do we think we need to tweak these around given that Luke started school now? He gets very tired after school, all of those kind of things. So the first thing to say is that when you review arrangements, once everything else has settled down, you may find that it's an easier process. If it's not, then ask yourself what it was that made it so difficult the first time. Was it the process that you used? Was it the high level of the emotions? And what can you do to address that and make it different this time? Because it's always a learning curve. lots of people say to me, well, I don't know how to sort these things out. And if you haven't separated from someone before, why would you? Nobody would teach you that until you get to that point. So part of it is about equipping yourself for the discussions, to find the right place to have them and the right support to enable you to have those discussions. If you worry that a review of the arrangements for your children is going to be a difficult process. The support involved is something, that I've talked a lot about in different videos, and it depends on each couple as to what support they might need. So I'm not going to kind of list that now, I think, but there are obviously blogs that I've written that go into that a bit more, and videos. But I really think the importance of, if you think reviewing arrangements for your children is going to be another huge fight, then it would be sensible to look at how you can get help to make them more constructive. So I hope that that's helped talk about the importance of reviewing arrangements for children. And I hope that the series of the 5 blogs focusing on different ways to help parents minimise the effects of their separation on children has been helpful. And there'll be a new blog up next Monday. There won't be a Facebook Live next week because I'm going to be on holiday, but there will obviously be a blog, and you can look at that. And then I will be coming back to doing more Facebook Lives. If you are not already on our mailing list and you have separated from a partner and feel that it would be really useful to get some support around that and to access the free resources that I send out, then please sign up for our mailing list. You can do that via bit.ly/LKW FamMed And if you are a professional who works with couples who separate, then I have a separate list for you sharing the same resources and also details of events and training courses that I'm running. And that is bit.ly/LKW FamMed sign up, SIGN up. So I hope that that's a really a good way to close the week. There's quite a few things that I have shared with you in this video, and I hope that you have a really good weekend. Thank you very much for watching.